Hey there guys, and welcome back to Alex Invest. Today the markets are bleeding red again. I want to go through MVMD because they've just decided to list on the TSXV instead of the Canadian Stock Exchange, right, the CSE. So I want to go through that narrative a little bit and talk about sort of what I kind of think about that. And some other stocks have done similar things and what's kind of happened there. And then I also want to go through EXRO and their annual shareholder letter that came out last week. So those are the things we want to talk about, but I want to talk to you guys about MVMD, the uplist to the TSXV, if you can really call it an uplist. It's more of a just change in listing, right, from the CSE to the TSXV. And it's good, it's all fine, but, a lot of companies kind of switch over exchanges in hopes that, there's going to be an increase in investors, their stock price is going to run, but I just don't see much of a point in that for MVMD specifically here, right? They're waiting on these huge this huge news, right, for partnerships, for their cold chain, for their ivermectin, and so it kind of is surprising to me to see them in the midst of all that move towards the TSXV listing, where it's like, why are we not just kind of working on getting this news out, working on their technology here and kind of moving that along instead of now kind of focusing on a potential listing to the TSXV, because, and this is kind of a few reasons, right? And we'll talk about the good things first about a listing over to the TSXV. There's a bigger kind of access to the investor pool on the TSXV because, for example, Simple, you can't trade CSE stocks. You can only trade TSXV stocks, and then obviously TSX stocks, NASDAQ, etc., right? But not CSE. So you get kind of and this is for a couple of different platforms, right? So you get kind of a bigger pool of investors there, first of all. The TSXV does also have slightly higher listing requirements, which is why we could see this being an uplisting, really. But they also offer kind of slightly more complicated regulatory models, and they're also much more expensive on the TSXV. So the listing is interesting. I think regardless of what they're listing on, it's not going to make too much of a difference. And in total, we can kind of just take a look at sort of two other companies that have recently done this. One moved from the CSE to the TSXV, which is what we see in this scenario, and that's a very good food company, and their share price actually tanked from that. So that has me a little bit worried. And then if we take a look at heat, right, we've been talking about heat quite a lot lately. The kind of the exact opposite thing. They moved from the TSXV over to the CSE, and the reason they did that is because of sort of the easier listing requirements, and then being able to kind of take those oil revenues and combine them with their new green technology revenues that they're going to hope to have in the future. So the being able to combine those, which is something that isn't possible on the TSXV, is the reason they decided to switch over to the CSE. Now, the reason we kind of had this huge run in heat may be, as I mentioned in my last video, because of the fact that a lot of investors couldn't pull out their money from their Hillcrest Petroleum shares and only from the newly acquired heat shares up until a certain point. And then obviously now we've seen the price come back down because everyone can sell their shares again. So, either way here, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference. I think the real difference here for MVMD, which is something that should come before this new listing on the TSXV, is some news on this stock, on their company. We've been waiting now for a while for any kind of news here on cold chain, FDA approvals, on the BSL-4 trial, on any partnership, really, and it's all in the pipeline. We went through this on the video where I showed you guys the MVMD pipeline, right? And things should be coming here soon. But I think it would be a mistake for MVMD to change listing to the TSXV before bringing out some new news and some news that's really going to affect the share price, because what's going to happen is once we move to the TSXV on known news, there's a good chance that something similar as we saw with Very Good Foods might happen to the stock. Yes, I picked up some more shares of MVMD today because we are kind of at that 0.93 level right now. We had some nice dips to the 0.88. But, you know, in general, if this TSXV listing comes before any news, I think that might hurt the share price because some people are going to exit their positions, and on top of that, there aren't going to be any more new positions coming into the TSXV listing because there's no news on the stock. So that's kind of my opinion on that. I'm hoping for some news soon in MVMD. I'm still very, very bullish on MVMD. Like I just mentioned, I did buy some more shares. But you know, this kind of listing to the TSXV, this uplist is strange in my opinion for right now, for at their current level. But maybe they'll have some news come out with that listing to the TSXV. So hopefully that kind of happens there and we see some good things. And now just to kind of quickly recap that, if we go over to the news announcement that came out today about the listing on the TSXV, we can see here they say, we believe that pursuing a listing on the TSXV is a great step for Mountain Valley MD Holdings and will provide increased liquidity and trading capabilities in MVMD's common shares for both institutional and retail investors. And that essentially means they're hoping that there's going to be more investors coming into MVMD because of this change in listing, because the TSXV kind of has more access, or retail investors have more access to the TSXV than they do to the CSE, which provides, you know, increased liquidity, increased trading capabilities like they're saying. But again, without any news and without anything that's going to be pushing the share price upwards, there's really going to be no new investors coming in. So that's kind of my opinion on the matter. And you know, I'm very bullish, but I think, you know, again, this would be a mistake to kind of get this listing going before any news comes out on the stock. Now, the other thing I wanted to go over with you guys today is obviously the EXRO annual shareholder letter, because there's a few interesting things to note right here. Now, first of all, obviously their long-term vision focusing on licensing or manufacturing partnerships that will allow us to supply high volume customers. Right now, that is in a longer term here. We're not going to see that kind of immediately, and I think they will probably lean towards sort of more licensing in the long term than they will be on manufacturing. Well, and this obviously depends on these kind of high volume customers or companies that they'll get here. But, you know, a lot of them are, especially these EV companies, are likely going to want to do the actual manufacturing kind of in-house and just license the technology from them here. But it is nice to see that they're working hard at building out the low volume manufacturing facility. And then they also recently announced plans for a new low volume manufacturing facility in Calgary, which will meet the highly regulated automotive standards so that we can deliver our coal driver product line to passenger vehicle electric vehicle markets. Now, this is big, right? Because again, what we were talking about earlier, these specifications that you need to kind of get the coal driver working for EVs is quite a lot because of regulation. Now, they're kind of arming themselves here with this new Calgary facility so that they can meet these standards and actually start getting these into these EVs. And that's really where we're going to see some big revenues come in for EXRO, in my opinion here. And they say, you know, because this is kind of a longer term project here to get this coal driver into the EVs, it's not kind of the only market they're planning for this year. They kind of want to go for these less regulated markets to start off, to kind of start getting these revenues, really not necessarily prove the concept because that's already done, but kind of prove that everything works properly as it should here, right? And that's kind of where they want to get into these Motorino deals, etc., micro mobility and recreational, right? And I thought this line was very interesting too. We're also preparing to increase our presence in the US in the near future. To this end, we've set up a US subsidiary now and are planning for growth in the US markets for both coil driver and BCS product roadmaps, so EXRO can be ready for Buy America. Now that is very good to see, because obviously, you know, Canada's great, but the US is really where we're seeing a big change to EVs. You know, we've got Biden with a huge infrastructure bill, and you know, this huge move to kind of clean energy, and EXRO wants to be a part of it, and I think they can quite easily be a part of it, getting in there. So that is going to be really, really big in my opinion as well. And then this coming off of that US thing, they also want to move to kind of Asia and Europe. Once they've kind of established a foundation in mobility applications, meaning they have some partnerships, they have revenues coming in, they have maybe a little bit established in the US already, they're really established in Canada now, and that's when they really want to start expanding to kind of a broader market here. You know, they say here, once, you know, they've established some backlog and a long-term pipeline, that's when they want to get into this, right? So it really is after we kind of see and realize some revenues, some different partnerships potentially, and not until then, and perhaps not until we actually see integration of the coil driver in a passenger electric vehicle, that we'll see this move to Asia and Europe, because that's probably really where they're going to want to focus that that coil driver in that segment on, because that's kind of where there's going to be bigger revenue potential there for that, right? And that's really pretty much it. Now, of course, they always have their milestones in their corporate deck, which you can reference to. That's this right here. We've gone over it quite a lot before. We are still in line with everything they've been saying. They say again in the annual shareholder letter that they are in line with what's happening this year, their growth plans, and they're moving forward here. So that is all good there. And that is pretty much going to be it for the video today, guys. I hope you liked it. If you did, please like, subscribe, and leave me a comment as always. And other than that, I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you guys on Thursday.